morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is an interview of Mr Mutsvangwa, the spokesperson of ZANU-PF, being interviewed by a South African journalist, in which he was asked to explain why 3 to 5 million Zimbabweans are in South Africa. Here is what he had to say.
One can understand.
Yes.
People watching you
Yes.
are probably interested to know, why is it that so many of Zimbabweans are in South Africa? If you do a simple Google search, it'll tell you that the estimates are that between 3 to 5 million Zimbabweans are in South Africa. As to why they're here, well, I suppose the stories vary. To your understanding as a governing party, why are many Zimbabweans in South Africa?
Look, it is the search of better pastures. That's natural. South Africa had an advantage of having comparative access to capital as a white apartheid state. In colonial times, capital into Africa followed white. And South Africa had the biggest white population on the African continent. So all the Western countries, they gave South Africa a certain edge in access to capital. We in Zimbabwe, in Rhodesia, were second, because in terms of our white population, we're the second largest white population. We also had a comparatively better access to capital than any other African countries. And we had migration of labor from Mozambique, from Malawi, from Zambia into Zimbabwe. This is natural that people follow where there's better advantage in terms of development, and capital gives an edge in development. And these two minority regimes of Southern Africa had a sizable white population, so they had better access. But now things have changed. We now having capital in a flat global world where China can supply capital, India can supply capital, Riyadh can supply capital. So we are now having an Africa which is going to the global markets getting capital. So that discrepancy in the access of capital, which was a precursor of the colonial, which was a case of the colonial era, is beginning to disappear. You can't believe it. There is now a seamless environment between life in Zimbabwe and life abroad. That's why our diaspora is coming back to Zimbabwe, putting a lot of money. We have never consumed so much cement and steel as we have done in the last 5 years of the current.
We'll stop it there. Ben, you listen to that one.
Good day to you and good day to all viewers. Thank you for joining us. I mean, I believe to have any answers to a problem, or to accept that there is a problem, that is the beginning of fixing it, or looking for ways to fix it. Now, in this case, when Mr. Mutsvangwa is asked to say, why do you think that there are so many South Africans, so many Zimbabweans that are now in South Africa? I mean, 3 to 5 million, that's a huge, huge chunk of our population. And to say that, it's greener pastures, I mean, I would want to go back just a little bit and say, just past few days or weeks, South Africans have been up in arms with Zimbabweans who are taking advantage of their healthcare system. Zimbabweans are going to South Africa just to get access to healthcare. To me, that, shows clearly there is something wrong with Zimbabwe. It's just not green pastures. There is something that is pushing people towards neighboring countries. Not only South Africa now, there is, a lot of Zimbabweans that are in Namibia, Zambia, all corners, they are living using all border posts. Clearly, that shows there is something wrong within Zimbabwe. And him failing to admit that means that he is not willing to solve a problem.
Well, the explanation he gave as people are leaving because of greener pastures, if he had stopped there, that would have been correct. And in this particular case, they are leaving the country because of the economic hardships. And even where basic services like healthcare have all but collapsed. So they are leaving the country because of that. But the explanation he went on to give, that is because South Africa had a better economy, because it had a wide population and they had access to capital. That is the most nonsensical explanation, because it doesn't explain the situation now. Are we explaining the situation during apartheid and white ruled Zimbabwe or Rhodesia? Or are you explaining the situation now? Because if that was the case, and South Africa benefited from that big investment, and like by his own admission, Zimbabwe did benefit too, Zimbabwe should still remain the second strongest economy in the SADC region. Zimbabweans should not be living for South Africa in the numbers they are living, because other countries like Mozambique, Zambia, Malawi, and so forth, who did not have that same advantage, you would think it affects them more than it affects Zimbabweans. Whereas in reality, it's the other way around. There are many Zimbabweans in not just South Africa, but many other neighboring SADC countries, because those nations are doing a lot better than Zimbabwe. I think I find it disappointing that ZANU-PF can still continue to give nonsensical answers. And what makes it worse is that the opposition never ever seem to be on the ball and correct the narrative. To me, that is one of the most disappointing things. People like Chris Mutsvangwa are allowed to get away with absolutely outrageous explanations.
No, it reminds me of an interview that Dr. Simbama Kone participated, and he was talking about how Zimbabwe from independence and transitioned into a government, majority government, and so forth. His keywords for me there were, when we took over at independence, we really had no idea what we were inheriting. Because, if the truth is to be said, Zimbabwe was a thriving, economy, was doing well as a country, despite, the war and sanctions and all sorts of things. They were doing very, very well. And when we took over and decided to splash our wealth and, give each other, limousines, motorcades, houses, and so forth, which were not planned for, was the catalyst to what we are experiencing now. And this has not stopped. Bribes, corruption has always been the ZANU-PF, way of, closing doors to opposing forces and so forth. They bribe themselves out, This was and still is the problem that is, has led us to where we are now, where we are finding that everybody, I mean, like I said, 3 to 5 million. Zimbabwe has a population, they say maybe about 14 million thereabout. I think maybe it should be more by now. If you find all your people, and these are young people that are going out to South Africa to go and do, small jobs and so forth, it shows clearly that there is something wrong with what the country has to offer now. And by, like you said, him giving these feeble excuses and not addressing and not saying the truth, it means that as ZANU-PF, as a party, as government, they are not willing to correct that which is not right. They are not willing to acknowledge there is a problem. And if you do not acknowledge that there is a problem, there is no way of you fixing it. And it's sad, and it's also pathetic when he stands and tries to justify something that the whole world over knows Zimbabwe is a case study for failure, for a failed economy.
Well, I would like to give the South African journalist, a chance to comment on Mutsvangwa's answer. Sorry, let me.
We agree to differ, but I'll try to give you facts.
Well, let me cut to the chase.
Yes.
It was only in April
Yes.
that a big stairway was announced in Zimbabwe by those that are against what they say is a corrupt Mnangagwa administration. You speak about mines that are producing gold.
Yes.
We have seen the documentary about gold that is leaving Zimbabwe, according to that documentary, through corrupt means. The population of Zimbabwe in South Africa, they'll tell you that they are fleeing poverty and political suppression. Now, are you telling me that these things are a figment of the things that have been reported about?
Look, we went through a bad patch, especially after 2002, when we fell out with the West, and our economy's wheels literally fell off the bus. This is what happened in 2002. This was the heavy hit from the West, because these are our traditional economic partners. They suddenly put Zimbabwe on they unleashed hell on the Zimbabwean economy. I know, because I'm the Zimbabwean ambassador to China at that time. We had to be dispatched to look for an alternative source of capital in 2002, because our traditional economic cooperating partners had abandoned us. They'd actually given us an ultimatum to reverse the land reform or face economic hell. So when your economy suffers the sledgehammer effect of London, New York, Frankfurt, Paris, Milan.
Well, I think we need to, we don't have to listen to all that again. The question was very specific. The documentary that the gentleman was referring to was the Al Jazeera documentary in 2023. Why is he taking us back to 2002? He is just refusing to answer the problem. Zimbabwe is a failed state because corruption, if it was bad during Mugabe's time, I think most people are now admitting that it is even worse with Mnangagwa. Corruption has become rampant. There is no way a country can prosper when 80%, as per the Al Jazeera documentary, 80% of Zimbabwe's gold was being smuggled out of the country. And that's 1.6 billion US dollars. And what is worse, Mnangagwa himself was named in that documentary as one of the godfathers. And he is using some of those amassed wealth from all that corruption, because it's not just gold, diamonds, lithium, and many other resources, including some of the own government procurement contracts. They are subject to being awarded to those with the right political connections, like Whitney Chifayo, Kunakwashe, Tagwirei, and so forth. And the regime, Mnangagwa himself being at the center of it, is milking it. And he is using part of the wealth that he is amassing to bribe everybody. This is at the heart of our problem. Even the opposition is now in ZANU-PF's deep pockets. Making meaningful political change near impossible. Because if ZEC, the police, the judiciary, the opposition, they are all in the ruling party's pockets, where is change going to come from? And I think that is the problem that Zimbabwe is facing today. And I think people of Zimbabwe should wake up to that reality and realize that the country is in a serious problem, is facing some serious problems, and do something about it. Because this problem is not going to go away. ZANU-PF, Mnangagwa, is digging in. He intends to stay in power and has no intention of implementing any meaningful political change to allow for free, fair, and credible elections. Mutsvangwa, throughout this whole interview, has not addressed the problem. We have got 3 to 4 to 5 million Zimbabweans in South Africa. They are economic and or political refugees. And as long as Zimbabwe's economy and Zimbabwe remains a pariah state, we are going to see more Zimbabweans leave the country as economic and political refugees. We need to seriously face that problem. Ben, do you want to give your closing remarks?
In closing, I would say, I agree with you. Here we have a situation where, Zimbabwe has good friends and friends that are trying to show us, things that are going wrong and should be addressed. I mean, take for example the Al Jazeera documentary Gold Mafia. It was brought to light to show, the illicit trades and activities that are happening, and when you find a president being implicated in these trades. One would have thought, he would have wanted to clear out his name by exposing or setting up a team to investigate whatever is happening. But lo and behold, they never even spoke about it as a government. And not only that, recently we have South Africa, our very good friend, and they too acknowledge that South Africa is a very good friend. They have shown that they were dubious and weird transactions that were happening between ZEC and corrupt individuals like Chivai, where monies were being transacted in mysterious ways. Nothing was said about that. And now we have a South African police commissioner ringing the alarm bells to say, these same characters that are associating with the president, they are into money laundering and very, very, dangerous black market deals, And up to today, nothing has been said or spoken about it. In fact, they are now more than friends. The president is actually pictured, having dinners and private parties with such individuals, which just goes to show that, ZANU-PF is not willing to address the problem, to why our Zimbabweans, becoming beggars, becoming, a nuisance, in neighboring countries. So for me, I would say ZANU-PF has never and will never be willing to address the problem that Zimbabweans and Zimbabwe are facing. They will rather come up with these feeble excuses and blame it on somebody else than address the problem and name the problem. Because through addressing and acknowledging that there is a problem, you have set up a platform so that you can try and fix it. But if you're not going to admit it, in other words, you're saying Zimbabwe is doing fine. Let's continue as things, as things are. And for me, that's very, very worrying. Very, very worrying.
My closing remarks is that Zimbabwe has the opportunity to end this ZANU-PF dictatorship. We had a number of opportunities in the past, we wasted them. The best chance ever for the country was during the GNU of 2008 to 2013. We failed to implement even one token reform to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. We've said on this platform, but it's worth repeating, we cannot keep on participating in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. The opposition, like I've mentioned earlier on, is in ZANU-PF's pockets. The truth of the matter is MDC, CCC leaders have failed to implement even one token reform, and they've been calling people to participate in flawed elections to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. For Pete's sake, it's for the people of Zimbabwe to wake up to the reality that the MDC, CCC are ZANU-PF Team B, playing for Team A to win and for Team A to have legitimacy. At the present moment, the opportunity to stop all this madness is for the people to stop participating in flawed elections only to give ZANU-PF legitimacy. Think about it. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.